computer. Great. Okay. All right. So welcome to the Skills Lab on how to beat an applicant tracking system. We're going to talk about leveraging keywords and quite a few other pro tips that we have for you to make it past or to get through an applicant tracking system. We've got lots of advice. Most of this is framed around some content we already have available for you in the Career Center Career Library. But first, we're going to start with what is an applicant tracking system. An applicant tracking system, I very casually refer to it as a robot that's scanning your documents to make sure that you match with certain keywords and skills that have been identified in advance. It basically scans your documents and primarily with your resume for those keywords. What's really important to know about applicant tracking systems is that 98% of Fortune 500 companies use them. And because the average, the reason they use them is because it helps them get better candidates faster with less labor. This data point, 250, the average corporate job gets 250 applications. That's pre-pandemic. So I think that number is actually much higher now. But what's really interesting and why we're hoping you can consider some of these pro tips is that only 30% of applications that are submitted through an applicant tracking system even get looked at by the human eye, which means 70% of resumes that go into a job posting are not ever looked at. And so we'll talk about how to make sure you're in that 30% and even how to kind of get outside and go around that 30%. So whenever I talk about keywords and applicant tracking systems, I want to make it clear, sorry, I'm going to move this a little bit so it's not totally in our way. I'll hide it right now. I want to make sure that people understand the keywords range from hard skills to soft skills to experience language. That can mean technology, that can be certain kinds of education, that can be a certification, etc. Also, one quick note, this slide deck is a little text heavy. That's because I send out the actual whole deck as an attachment. So don't feel like you have to sit here and kind of take notes and comb through this whole thing. I intentionally make it a little bit text heavy so that if you're not part of the presentation, you can refer to this deck for a resource, just to explain a little bit about how we do this. But basically, it's looking for keywords that are specific to the functions of the job that are important. And you can see on the right-hand side of this slide, I have a screenshot that I took of an internship posting or a job posting, I don't remember, where you can start to skim through that and get a sense of what those keywords are. It's pretty easy to see right now, Google Analytics, SEO, Adobe Creative Suite, so a lot of the proper nouns, a lot of the technology words, but even things like analytical or data. These are keywords that might be plugged into an applicant tracking system that you want to make sure you can integrate into your resume. Let's go to the next slide because I have an example here for you. Sorry, I'm going to pop this one back open. So you can see here, this is a current opening for a digital media specialist at Twistle, a Chicago company. And I just illustrated how you would start to cultivate knowledge about what keywords you would put into your documents. Now, if you're doing a job search for quite a few different positions, maybe you're looking at a job that's social media heavy, one that's kind of more portfolio heavy, or maybe you're open to a lot of different roles, you're going to want to track the keywords that are associated with those kinds of roles. So you will be customizing your resume and cover letters with these keywords, and we'll talk a little bit about how to do that. We also have a workshop coming up on how to project manage your job search, which is really focused on making this process as efficient and not time consuming as possible. But you can see really clearly here, digital media is a keyword I want to make sure I would have in my resume. WordPress, Google Analytics, SEO, Adobe Creative Suite. Now, I'm going to pause here and say, if you have never used WordPress before, and this is a job that you were really interested in, it would probably be worth your time to invest about a half an hour into playing with a free WordPress account so that you could conceivably decide for yourself, is this a technology I could learn? Because there's a ton of free tutorials on WordPress and technologies like that. Is this a technology I feel like I could say I have some basic knowledge of because I played with it for a while, and if I got the interview, I could play with it more? Then I would incorporate it into your resume. not necessarily attached to a project if you haven't done it with a project, but in a skills section, just so that this resume gets past that applicant tracking system. I don't want a single piece of software between the barrier between you and an interview, especially when you can gauge for yourself how easy or difficult it would be for you to learn any one of these tools. WordPress is a great example of a tool that has so many tutorials available for it that if it were between you and getting a job, you could probably teach yourself WordPress to a point that would make it, that could get it on your resume. Now, in an interview, are you going to say you've used it a lot? No. But the point of the resume is getting the interview and really being able to contextualize your skills. So that's just an aside I have around some of the skills language you'll see in SEOs, that you do want to cultivate knowledge about what skills are in demand in your industry, and then what are skills that you actually should probably put a little bit of time into upskilling on, so that you can put WordPress or you can put Google AdWords on your resume. And I do caution against paying for any of this training. There's a lot of free opportunities that we want you to know about. But even when you look down here, you can see when we talk about cross-functional teams. Now, this might not be integrated into an applicant tracking system, but it's not a bad idea to mimic some of the language that they're using so that they can immediately see. Besides, we can't always predict what's in that tracking system. So I'm not ever going to recommend you copy an exact bullet from a job description, but I am going to say pay attention to some of the more meaningful terms. Now, I didn't circle Pardot or Pardot, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, or marketing automation, just giving you a sketch of kind of how I would start to identify relevant keywords. So that's in the requirements section. But if you go to the responsibilities section, you're also going to pick up some keywords. So optimizing, this one is really specific to this role, which is why I highlighted it. Establish Twistle's digital presence as a leader in patient engagement. So patient engagement is something that most people who do digital media probably don't have experience with unless they've worked in healthcare before. So that might be something you think about in a cover letter. Like, I'm particularly interested in this role because I like this idea of media that engages patients. I care about healthcare, whatever. So this is just an example of, you're going to be pulling keywords from both the qualifications and the responsibilities section, and even further on, potentially in terms of the website and the way the company talks about themselves. But this is just an illustration of how you start to build a library of what keywords you need in your resume to make it through that applicant tracking system. I talk really fast, so I want to just give you guys the opportunity. I'm going to pull up the chat. Oh, that's not the chat. I'm going to pull up the chat. Feel free to throw a question here if you have one now. Feel free to unmute and ask a question before I move on. I just want to give everyone that chance. If you don't have a question, I'll move on, but I'll give you a little bit just to pop in and ask one. Okay, great. Again, feel free to unmute if you have questions. I'm going to go on to our next section. This is only half an hour, so I do move through this quickly. All right, so where are you going to use keywords so that the applicant tracking system finds them, right? So in most cases, the applicant tracking system is really going to be looking at the resume. In some cases, it'll skim both the resume and cover letter, but let's rely on the most important keywords landing in your resume. The places that you would feature these keywords are in a summary, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. Job titles, so for example, if you're a student assistant at DePaul, and you're applying to a role that's a digital media role, and you've done digital media in your role, but your job title is digital assistant, or sorry, student assistant, you can go to your manager anywhere you work and say, hey, is it okay if I use a job title that's more descriptive? Like maybe I'm an events assistant in this office, or maybe I'm a social media assistant. That's a good way to incorporate keywords into your job title. And there is no such thing as a transcript of jobs. So as long as the person who you report to is okay with you using an alternative job title and incorporating a skill in there, then that's totally acceptable to do. Of course, you're going to put them in your accomplishment statements in terms of those bulleted points about things that you've accomplished. You'll be using a lot of skills there, sometimes even like produced a campaign using Adobe Photoshop. You might throw technology in there. You might throw some of the other keywords in there. Most folks should have a separate skills section. Now, if you're in technology, that skills section looks a little bit different than it does if you're not in a really hardcore technology role. And then I'll also talk a little bit shortly about a project section. So that's for folks who maybe have done a lot of projects during their courses that contain some of those relevant skills. But first we're going to go to, let me quickly pop out of this presentation and go to the MC Resume Optimizer. This is a tool, sorry, I went to the wrong link. This is a tool that I think any stage of the process is going to benefit you. So this link will be in the follow-up email that I send to you. It's a free service. MC is a data company that currently offers this optimizer, which functions a lot like an applicant tracking system for free. You don't have to create an account. There's lots of these tools where you have to create an account, you get somebody for free. This one's entirely free. I don't have to create an account ever to do this, but it mimics an applicant tracking system, and it's pulling very current data from current job postings and LinkedIn profiles. So it's very up to date. So I'm gonna just quickly load an example resume on here. And the email or the URL is skillsmcdata.com/resume. I'll throw it in the chat real quick so you guys can all have it. It'll be in my follow-up email, but that email might not go out till this weekend. So you can see immediately, if you copy and paste your resume into this tool, it will automatically underline everything in that resume that appears to be a skill. So you can see right now it has 11, this is just their sample. It has 11 found skills. This is a fabulous tool to currently see what skills you have in your resume. Now, if you want to evaluate, okay, what skills should I have for a specific kind of role? It has this other feature where you type in a job title. So you can see it: mediator, media specialist, media manager, media assistant. I'm just going to go into media assistant. It will then use the data it's pulled, the algorithm it has around the media assistant job function, and tell you what key skills you actually have on your resume, what relevant skills, which unusual skills. It makes sense that there's unusual skills here because this is a generic kind of sample resume. And then the skill opportunities that you need to get in to your resume. And you can see that none of these are names of software right now. But in many cases, it'll say something like Adobe Photoshop or InDesign or another piece of software. But this is a great first start. So you're identifying keywords while you're looking at job postings, but you can also then audit your resume according to this tool. So this isn't the only source of information, like you're going to be looking at the job postings as well, but this is also a really good tool for folks who are trying to figure out what skills their resume has and what they don't. And you can see in this tool, this summary has skill keywords, education has keywords, experience has keywords in the job title, in the accomplishment statements. There's a skills section. All of the sections that I talked about before are featured in here. So that's the MC Resume Optimizer, really fabulous tool. I'm going to go back into, again, if you have a question, throw it in the chat while I move this over. Any questions about the MC Resume Optimizer? Yeah. You can unmute or throw it in the chat. It's up to you. I'm trying to reload this page because one of my images didn't load. And then I'll get this presentation back up in presentation mode. That Resume Optimizer debuted a couple months ago, and to my mind, it's the best free applicant tracking system-ish product you can find. The fact that you don't have to register is really great. We're all kind of tired of getting ads and all that stuff. All right, let me get back into presentation mode here, and we'll go back to some of the other pro tips that we have to share with you guys. And I'll talk a little bit about some of our resources at the end. All right, so we talked about applicant tracking system. We talked about identifying and labeling keywords. We're going to go through that. We talked a little bit about where you can utilize those keywords. Does each resume have to be customized? The answer is yes, because the applicant tracking system is going to be coded to look for something different each time. That being said, you might only have 5 resumes. Depending on the variety of roles you're applying to, you might only have 4 resumes. You might only have 5. You'll have to determine as you do this search how much these jobs have in common. Does that mean I'm not going to triple check every time I send a resume? No, I'm still going to do that. But you might have 3 or 4 resumes. You might have 5 resumes, depending on what you're doing. The cover letter will always be tailored, but again, it's going to have a lot in common with what type of role. So it depends on the number of type of roles you're interested in. You can see this handout right here that I'm kind of moving the cursor over, tailoring your resume and cover letter. This has a lot of tips about how to do that and how to do that easily. We have a bunch of content about project managing the search, like I referred to earlier, that helps make this process or streamline. Sorry, I think that's where, yeah, sorry, this is my first time with this slide deck. This is where I was going to take you to the resume optimizer, but I've already done that. So we're going to go to some of my favorite pro tips. So in terms of getting skill keywords on your resume, the skills section is a real no-brainer, right? To have a skills section with a bunch of, you could have a skills section and a technology section as 2 different sections. But if you're someone who has had, let's say some, like as a student, I had server jobs, I was a lifeguard, I had a lot of jobs, but they weren't always related to the kind of work I wanted to do. So you do have the option to include actual projects from your classes on your resume as a way of demonstrating a certain amount of experience and skill and getting keywords in. So for example, and this is a handout we have on our website, for example, you can see here are just 3 quick examples of what projects could look like on a resume. Now these could be in a separate section called projects, or they could be in one of your skill-based experience sections. So if I had, let's say I was looking for a role in a law firm doing research, I might have a research experience section, and this first example, alternatives to incarceration, a policy paper, might be within that section. But you can see basically they're formatted similar to the way you would format a job posting. It just doesn't necessarily have the employer, although at the bottom example, you can see this is like a spec project, meaning speculative. So a lot of creative projects are for speculative clients. So in this case, the student made a 90-second animation that the Shed Aquarium could have used, but a whole class of students made different animations. So it's not that the Shed Aquarium paid the student to do it. They're not claiming that. They're just claiming this is an experience. And then they take the parts of the task associated with that project and bullet them out just like you would any other accomplishment statement. So that's a territory that's not often used by DePaul students, and I think it's a really good space for both getting super relevant experience onto your resume and getting some of those skills and keywords on the resume that you need. All right, another pro tip. Let me move this down here. I love a resume summary. If only because the average recruiter looks at a resume for 6 seconds. So this means if I can put a 2 to 3 line summary at the top of my resume, I can get in a ton of skill language that's great for the applicant tracking, and that makes a very strong claim about who I am. So essentially, if I'm only looking at a resume for 6 seconds and I start by reading this quick summary at the top, I'm then just skimming for evidence that this is the case. So for example, a summary might just start with a list of functions you have. So cinematographer, videographer, storyboard artist, producer, and editor with experience in. And so it gets really listy in terms of being able to demonstrate experience, skills, or even passions for who you are. The second example is emerging. You can add emerging to the front if you're feeling like, I don't know if I can call myself like a marketing specialist, although I would argue why not. You might do emerging marketing specialist or emerging in public relations professional with a passion for creating community and engaging diverse audiences. So there's different ways to structure, but a resume summary is really great to create both immediacy and introduce some of the important applicant tracking system skills. The last example, let me just hide this real quick, mental health professional, passionate about impacting the lives of culturally diverse communities, be a compassion and a commitment to high impact professional development. Now that's very much tailored to a job where the mission of that institution is to serve culturally diverse communities. But this is a great example of how immediate you can be with a resume summary that often just sits at the top of your resume and then your traditional sections appear after that. Any questions? I know the summary is kind of new to some people. It has replaced the objective, which you really don't need an objective anymore. because of the way job search works. I'm looking for my chat window real quick. Any questions? You can unmute or throw them in the chat. Are there any questions about the summary? Okay, great. Let me take a quick look. General questions, keywords in a really small, okay, this is a great question. I'm glad someone's asking this. So I have heard from students before this whole trick of white space keywords. So like you could, in the middle, in a line break, rather than having it just be blank, you could put a keyword in and then make it white. I mean, I understand how that could mechanically work. I think I would rather invest my time into getting that into accomplishment statements, because you're going to need that evidence later. Because once the human eye does look at it, if you're in the 30% of folks who get their resume looked at, you want that keyword visible anyway. And in terms of them being able to identify that, there probably is some software where they can do that. So really there's the risk reward ratio is pretty clear. I wouldn't really bother trying that. I've also heard from people who think that Word doc is skimmable than PDFs. I actually feel like PDFs are a little safer because Word docs carry so much. I mean, there's a certain, you know, like they're created at a certain time, there's a certain version, you're on a Mac, they're on a PC, like there's a lot of risk factors in there. I exclusively use PDFs, but you can use PDFs or DocXs for those, and they're both skimmable. Let's see. So these skills are included 10% of the, make sure to show them up. Does that mean I have to rewrite my resume tailored to the specific resume? If you use the resume optimizer and it says that these skills are in the top 10%, that's a good thing. That's what you want. I don't think you need to, that doesn't mean you need to add them, but I would make sure they're prioritized for that second look, right? That's where I'm talking. This is a great transition to talking about immediacy. So once you make it past the applicant tracking system, if the average recruiter is only looking at it for 6 seconds, that tells you, let's make sure those keywords are showing up right in those 6 seconds. And we have a whole handout on how to really achieve immediacy with design. I think I have a page. Yeah, I talked about it right here. Let me go back real quick. Some of it has to do with understanding the F pattern. So we have identified the keywords that we need to make sure we get them in the document. Then we make sure they're visually immediate for that screener who's going to look at these in person. That's where the summary can do a lot of favors for you, getting some of those major keywords in the summary. But then also formatting and design will help you do this as well. That's why I love to integrate keywords into job titles when possible, because when you think about it, if I'm reading in an F pattern, I'm either going to go horizontal, horizontal, vertical, and skim the section names. That's also why I like an experience section with a label. Like this could be called journalism experience. This could be called media experience. I'm a big fan of sometimes using a functional resume where you label the experience sections, or getting it into the job title and really thinking through the information architecture you've created by allowing the white space to help the eye move quickly, and by making sure potentially using a project section. I hope that, does that answer your question? Anybody have another question about immediacy or the 6 seconds we need to really carefully consider? All right, this is a handout we have in the Career Center. I'll show you where all those are at. This is, sorry, a wall of text. This is a super pro tip. This is the pro of all pro tips. This is a way for you to actually get around the entire applicant tracking system. If you are really interested in a role, there is absolutely no reason you shouldn't be sending your materials directly to the hiring manager in addition to submitting them via the application system. I can't say this enough. I know that this is a pretty common practice. Let me just get this up here so I can see if anybody pops up and has a question. This is a very common practice. Now, there's a little bit of an art to figuring out who the hiring manager is. Sometimes in the job posting, it will say, this position reports to, and then it gives you the title. Then your job is to get into the company website and hunt for who that is. Or if they don't have a great directory, or if you can't get in and do that, and you can't always do that, to get on LinkedIn and do some work. Basically what I will start to do is I will do a LinkedIn search for that employer. I will click on people, which shows me all the people who work there or who have worked there. And then I'll start doing keyword searches associated with their job title. The good news is that if you're kind of like, it might be this person, it might not be, all you have to do is at the end of this quick, brief message to that person, add something like, you know, if for some reason this email has been sent to the wrong person, please feel free to forward this to the hiring manager for this role. And you can see how quick and easy this little note is. Dear blank, I recently submitted my application for this role. Here's why I'm excited about it. I've attached my resume and cover letter. Thanks so much for your time. The end. If you do this and this gets opened by the hiring manager, you have gone around the entire applicant tracking system. One thing to keep in mind is when companies use these systems, oftentimes the hiring managers have no access to these documents except for when HR sends them to them. So when I'm hiring folks, I can't see any application unless HR decides to send it to me. And I might not see those when they come in. I might see those 10 days after they got in a stack of 20. So this is my super pro tip, because this really gets your application in front of the people who need to be looking at it. No one's screening this. And frankly, if you guess someone's work email and you're wrong, it bounces back. So there's no cost to doing this except the time it takes to try and figure out who the heck that hiring manager is. That's something we can help you do. If you want to drop into one of our hours, or if you want to make an appointment with an advisor and you're like, I'm applying for these 3 jobs, I really don't know how to figure out who the hiring manager is, we can help you do that. It's an art. I've been doing that for a couple job searchers recently, and they just kind of send me an email and say, who's the hiring manager for this? It's a muscle you build starting to figure that out. But like I said, it really is, if it goes to the wrong person, if you end up sending it to the boss of someone you'd report to, and you have something in there like, hey, if this has gone to the wrong person, please feel free to forward this on to the correct person. I appreciate your time, etc. So this is my super, super pro tip. Most folks don't know you can do this. You can absolutely do this. This is in service to the people who are looking at your documents. I know this is the last 2 jobs I hired, folks I hired. I got both of the people I hired. I saw their applications first because they contacted me directly. You won't always get a response though. Just keep that in mind. Just because you didn't get a response, if it didn't get bounced back, then they might've gotten it. You just aren't always you're not really asking for a response here. You're just getting it in front of them. Let's see, I have a couple questions down here I want to address. Let's see, I will improve. Okay, this is a great question. 1 or 2 pages. Here's what I would say. I would make the assumption that the document is only going to be scanned for 1 page, just to be safe. That means that if you really want a 2-page resume, you run the risk that the scanner doesn't scan it, which is fine. I have a 2-page resume. I've been in my career for a very long time. Do I front load a lot of the keywords on my first page? Absolutely. And frankly, in education, they love to read, right? So they're going to look at 2 pages more than other disciplines. If you've been out for a while, I have students who come to me and they say like, or alumni who come to me and they say, I have a 2-pager. I'm like, great. If we want to keep this 2 pages, let's just make sure we don't take any risks on page 1. And we get the things we need on page 1. This is why the summary is often your friend. And this is why sometimes we move skills to the first page. Maybe we move skills under your summary. It just depends. Typically you're safer with 1 page, but that is not, there are definitely exceptions to that where you do want 2 pages. And for graduate admission, obviously you can go over a page, but that's just one thing to think about. Okay, great question. If someone on LinkedIn is the job poster, most times that means they're just the screener, okay? It depends. You can do a little bit of homework. So typically for most roles, depending on the size of the organization, the person who posts on LinkedIn, if they work in human resources, their job is to find 10 great candidates for the person who would actually manage that person. That's the hiring manager, is the person who would manage that person. So getting it in front of a recruiter as opposed to going through an applicant tracking system, also a good thing. It's not necessarily the same thing as getting it in front of the hiring manager. But you can also ask that recruiter, who would the hiring manager for this role be? because recruiters on LinkedIn do expect conversation. I mean, that's why they're there. This is their job. This is where they do their work. So you could even ask the recruiter, whoever posted it. And in some cases, if it's posted on the job board, it's usually an HR recruiter, but sometimes, like I personally will post, hey, we're hiring, and that might be a job that I'm not the screener for, I'm the hiring manager for. So it kind of depends. It's never a waste of time to ask an HR person to contact someone, especially because it's not really, doesn't take that much time. I mean, that's the whole point of this process, is how do you do this really efficiently? If you just reach out and say, hey, I'm really excited about this role, just want to let you know I applied, curious also who the hiring manager might be or who this person would report to, that's, 30 seconds of your time. So it's not necessarily a waste of time. And recruiters are on LinkedIn for doing that. Let's see. Let me see what else is next. And please feel free to continue throwing questions in the chat or just interrupt. All right, let me just hide this real quick. I want to make sure in all these skills labs, I make sure you guys are aware of the services that are available to alumni and current students. Sorry, I've got a huge window right here. Did you guys know it got like super warm outside? So if you haven't been out, check it out. It's bizarre. We have drop-in career coaching during regular business hours and on Sundays. The Sunday times are really interesting. It's like 12 to 5 or 12 to 4. We do not have a line out the door for those. So that's a great immediate, like pop in and see somebody. We also have a ton of virtual appointments available with our full-time advisors. In most cases, you can schedule an appointment within 24 hours. We are during Monday through Friday typically, but there are some weekend hours for those as well. We also have a really new email resume review. I am going to say right now that it was shockingly popular to the point that we are now on a 5 to 7 day delay, which is not what we want to do. We're fixing that problem. But if you wanted more immediate attention, you're better off just making an appointment or popping in. That being said, that resume review process is going to be back up to speed soon. And if you wanted to submit now, the email resume review, you would be getting a response. It's just going to take a titch longer than we would have originally wanted it. It was more popular than we thought it would be. We also have a career library of over 50 handouts and videos on all the topics we've talked about. We want to make sure you know that Handshake is where all of our events are posted. It's also where a lot of employers are recruiting. So if you don't have a current updated profile, I would update it. Something like 70% of students with complete profiles get connected, get a recruiter to reach out to them. And then I also want to make sure everybody knows about the Alumni Sharing Knowledge program, which is a great way to start looking for informational interviews and connecting with other folks, alumni of DePaul. This is just the ad for the career library. These are some of the events that are coming up. Again, I'll look at some more questions, but really quickly, we have this networking event coming up next Thursday. There's also at noon, there's also a skills lab next week. I don't even remember what it is. Maybe project management is a skill, but then we also have in November, this project managing your skills lab, which we have handouts for, but that's a whole presentation where I'll just give you all my tips for making this as easy as possible. And let's see what else all the skills labs. So today's kind of a one-off in that most of these skills labs are around specific hard skills that you can put on your resume. This one's a little bit different because it's more about how to put keywords on your resume. But these skills are all happening this quarter. We'll be doing a bunch more weekly next quarter as well. And if you can't make it, you can RSVP and they'll be recorded just like this one. And what other questions do you guys have? Let me see what time I have. Oh, I did go over. Good gravy. I'm going to send out a quick poll. I'm happy to answer questions. We do an event checkout though, because we want to get your feedback on how these things are working for you. Feel free to throw in the chat if you have other ideas for skills labs. Feel free to unmute and ask a question. Feel free to chat and ask a question. We're just kind of here to help answer questions for you right now. Oh, I have to launch the poll. Sorry, I thought I did, but I did not. There we go.
I'm sorry. I do see the poll now. Thanks. I'll answer that. But I had to kind of run, so I am late, and I may have missed. I think I came on when you were answering this question, but my question was more so about the tracking the resumes, because I sat on another one you did with creating the website, and it came up. Yep. But I'm particularly kind of conflicted because I thought, recreating PDFs instead were more professional, like you said, because they're different systems. The formatting looks better. And also you don't have to worry about people like writing over what you submit. Yep. But then I've heard that the tracking systems, they're a little sensitive to PDF. So Microsoft Word indeed is better. So like I said, I came
Yeah.
in while you were addressing that. Could you like touch on that a bit? Just
Sure. And I was definitely like, I know that there are definitely sources out there that say DocXs are safer. I feel like that is a little outdated in terms of, I think that it used to be that with PDFs, to make them scannable, you had to set up specifically OCR or optical character recognition or something like that. That wasn't automatic. I think that's increasingly automatic, but that's a great, what I will do is I will actually ask, I don't work with employers very frequently, so I'll ask our employer engagement team to explicitly ask some recruiters that question. And when I send the follow-up email, I will tell you the most updated answer. I know that in terms of preparing this, I always look to see if anything has changed. I did find like Indeed is saying either PDF or DocX. That's what Indeed is saying right now. As a Mac user, it's hard for me not to just really run away from all Microsoft products. But I think that there's a world where you do A/B tests too, or you submit both kinds when possible. And that's where, again, getting this in front of the person and just removing a little bit of the chance involved in the applicant tracking system is really the thing that's going to help you. Because a person's going to be able to open the PDF for sure. But I understand the sensitivity to which tool is the best. Right now, the sources I found for today seem to think that either was fine. But I will let you know if we hear something different from some of the employers.
Yeah, thank you. Because I had that same kind of mind frame. It was doc and then transition to PDF. Like I'm a graduate alum from the graduate program, so I do not have one-page resume anymore.
Yeah.
So, you know, it kind of freaks me out when I sat on that call and heard that, however, maybe a month ago it was. And I was like, wow, am I doing this wrong? Because I'm actually in the process of looking for other jobs and stuff like that. So I was like, wow, maybe I've been doing this wrong all along. So yeah, I think that would definitely be helpful.
And if you apply to a job through the LinkedIn tool, you're actually, on some level, you worry about the page less, right? Because I think I think the future of resumes is LinkedIn. I don't think the future of resumes will be docs, really, for that much longer. So if you do feel like, I would A/B test a little bit too, applying through the actual employer's website and applying through LinkedIn. Because if you're applying through LinkedIn, it's grabbing your LinkedIn, but that does put pressure on your LinkedIn of doing all of the work and making sure your LinkedIn is as updated, and LinkedIn isn't as agile as resumes are.
Yeah, I don't think I've had much experience with LinkedIn. It's more so going directly through their sites. And of course, that kind of leaves the question of which process they're using, that type of thing. So
I think increasingly employers are going to be using LinkedIn as a direct hiring tool. So, I mean, varies by industry, obviously. I'm working with someone who just finished her MBA, and she's applying through LinkedIn and through employer sites to test, is there a higher percentage? But the thing that has consistently worked for her across the board has been reaching out to those hiring managers.
Yeah, and I did see that piece, and I think that's key. And I will definitely make sure to note that moving forward. But in case that there aren't any direct contacts, you have to go through their online website.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm just left at the exposure of whoever's on the other end of the universe, the technology.
Yeah, and that's where sometimes, depending on how much you want a role, you can call an HR and say, hey, I'm interested in applying for this position, but I'm curious who this reports to. Like, you don't even have to like contact a recruiter. In general, they can answer that. They won't always, but sometimes just doing a little bit of the phone calling, because I know some websites are impenetrable. But also come to a drop-in. I would love to test our drop-in staff and see if they're as good at finding employers.
Thank you. That's definitely helpful. I'll note all of the above as I continue my search. That's why I really want to kind of jump on here, but I kind of have to go visit them. Like, let me just try to jump in. So at least I'll get the follow-up. I know when you email it.
Yeah, you'll get the slide deck, relevant links, and then I will ask tonight one of those employer engagement folks to send that out to their folks. And that might mean like the follow-up will probably happen this weekend. If I have an answer by then, I'll include it. Otherwise, I'll send a double follow-up on that question.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
No problem. Anybody have other questions or comments or ideas for other skills labs? You can throw them in the chat. You can unmute and talk. We really want to support particularly.
Sorry, can I ask another question?
Sure.
Again, I'm so sorry if you already addressed this. As relates to resumes, I know that there are a lot of new design tools. I know it's a completely separate program because I'm signed up for that one as well. But if I can just touch on it, where do you stand regarding, I know it's probably varied by field as well, but like the benefits or between like a Canva or all these other sites that are kind of specific design versus just keeping it kind of straight and narrow, Word doc, Google, where is that kind of going? Do you have any suggestions on what, what that
Yeah, I'll say in traditional, there's definitely the world of traditional business roles that want Times New Roman in a Word doc with good old ugly, ugly, ugly formatting. I think that there's a continuum. Sorry, one second. Willie?
Oh, no problem.
The dudes are, what do you need? Okay, in just a minute. Literally just be a couple minutes. So I think there's a continuum between traditional and creative. And I advise most folks to stay closer to the middle when possible. That being said, I did talk about immediacy a lot. And I think a lot of the traditional formatted resumes fail to achieve immediacy. The other thing is, because we're reading on a screen now, there's no coincidence that Google is defaulting to Calibri and some of these sans serifs. And it's because we're screen readers now and things have changed. So I think I like to encourage folks to test themselves where they are on that spectrum, to push it too far and to push it back. I think typically you're going to be closer to the middle, but of course varying by industry. Because like if you're in a creative industry, you can push it to a certain point, but you're still going to need the immediacy. You're still going to need the legibility. The thing you risk also, if you get more and more and more creative, is folks have different design sensibilities. So if you stay kind of closer to the middle, you're at least not, because you don't know the screener. Because that's the thing, screeners are looking at these. These are not even necessarily like, if it's a graphic design role, it might go through a screener first. So it has to make it through them. Right. But I think that I think we're moving in the direction of a much more attractive document than I've seen before. And my priority is always immediacy and how much information can we get in that one page without overwhelming with maintaining the white space. Right. Canva has a lot of samples that are beautiful. Canva is based in, I think the Philippines, and
Australia, I think.
Yeah. And they have, the thing that they do is they have too many images on their resume templates. So, and it's because in other countries you do that. So I've seen some resumes in the US with photos. You can get away with it. It's just less standard. So just keep that in mind, that there's definitely, like in Germany, you have to have your photo on a resume. So a lot of their templates err in that direction. But I just say test yourself on that spectrum and see how far you want to go, and then maybe take it back a notch just to keep it nice and clean. But I think we're moving in that direction where the PDF is going to be king. I've never applied for a job with a Word doc, at least not in the last 8 years. I've only used PDFs, or no, I've never used a Google Doc either. I only design.
Yeah, I hadn't either. I just said that because I don't know. I felt like maybe, because I know like I couldn't think of any other the tools. I know Canva because I've used that for other purposes, but I know there are many others, and I just kind of trying to figure out.
Pages actually has better resume templates than Word.
Pages?
Microsoft Pages actually has kind of charming templates. I made my resume recently in Google Docs and in Canva both. There's really, the only problem with Canva is you don't have spell check, which for me is a disaster.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. At this point, it's trial and error, right? Until someone gets through and we see if it works.
Again, when you do, if you're informational interviewing, these are perfect questions for informational interviews, because I'm helping people, I'm talking to employers, but if you're out in the world, and you will get different advice from many people, but I think asking the folks who are doing the hiring is a great idea too.
Right. For the place you're looking for. Yeah. That makes sense. Thank you.
No problem. Any other questions or comments or ideas? Okay. All right. Thank you guys for doing this. I think I'm on next Thursday. I'm definitely on for some of these other presentations. So you guys have a good evening, and I hope to see you next time. Have a great day. Thank you.